The true impact of the Populist Party will not be felt until the election of 1896. But to understand it, you have to actually look at what happened in the 4 years before it. Now, Grover Cleveland, as I said in the previous video, is going to be elected in the election of 1892. And when he becomes president, the economy collapses in what we call the Panic of 1893. Now, the Panic of 1893's cause is, it's much more complex. But what's going to happen is that Grover Cleveland is actually going to attribute very simple causes to a complex situation. Not a smart thing to do for the most part. And he basically says, here's the two things that happen. This is why we have this panic, this depression. Remember, this is the worst economic disaster to hit the United States until the Great Depression. Number one, the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. Remember that act that they had passed to coin silver in unlimited quantities? He said that's got to go. And number two, the protective tariff. So you have to; those are the two causes of this, and you have to be very careful about attributing attributing to a complex situation simple causes. All right, it's much more complicated than that, and we'll just leave it alone for that. So when Cleveland becomes president of the United States, he's going to call Congress into special session in 1893. This is one of the things that made him a leader. He's really getting in charge. And between the time that he calls the session and when it actually is held, it's discovered that he actually has cancer, a very dangerous cancer in the roof of his mouth, right? So he's going to keep it secret from the country. He's going to say, you know what, I'm going to go on a little vacation but I'll be back before the opening of this Congress. And so he goes on vacation. And when the truth is, he's actually on a yacht having surgery on the roof of his mouth. The operation is successful, so successful that they fit a vulcanized rubber mouthpiece into his mouth, and no one knew any better. In fact, it would not be for another 25 years before we knew that something had happened. When Cleveland came back, he was able to preside over the new congressional session. And so when they do that, they're going to immediately repeal the Silver Purchase Act. Cleveland is able to do it. And remember, the farmers wanted more money. They wanted inflation. They're going to be enraged by this. They were Democrats like him. And he divides his party between Northeasterners and Southern Democrats. Then, to make matters worse, it doesn't work, right? And it doesn't restore confidence. In fact, people kept on redeeming silver for gold. And the reserve that I talked about in previous lectures of $100 million worth of gold to be ready to be exchanged, well, now it's down to $66 million. Cleveland is now going to be worried that total confidence in the United States economy is about to be lost. In step the hero or villain, depending on where you are, of this entire period when it came to saving the gold standard. His name was J.P. Morgan. You might have heard of him. He's one of the best investment capitalists ever in the history of the United States. Morgan is asked to go on basically a gold bond drive, right? He's going to go and he's going to sell U.S. bonds for gold. And he, in fact, makes money off of it himself. So much so that he actually gets investigated for how he did it. Now, they never discover anything that he did illegally to make money off of. And the United States, starting in 1894, has 4 gold bond drives selling for gold, and he was able to save the gold standard. Now, does Cleveland do the right thing here? Most likely, yes. He had to save the monetary system of the country. He does the right thing. But you're never going to convince a populist who wants silver. He's going to be absolutely hated by him. Now, Cleveland's also going to turn to reforming the tariff. And this is going to be a popular theme for the next couple of lectures, particularly as we get to the Progressive era. What happened is going to be that a new tariff is going to be introduced in the House of Representatives, and it's going to lower the existing rates. But when it goes into the Senate, where it's controlled by special interests, it's going to actually not only be raised to its original height, it's even going to go farther than that. So the tariff that's going to be passed out of the Congress and Senate is actually higher than the original tariff. Cleveland is disgusted by this, but he has 2 choices: veto or sign it. Cleveland said he couldn't sign the bill, nor would he veto it, so he just let it sit. Under the Constitution, the President of the United States has 10 days to sign a bill if Congress is in session. So he lets those in. If he doesn't sign it, it automatically becomes law. So that's what he does. He doesn't sign it, and 10 days later, it becomes law. The bottom line is, of course, he can now go throughout the country and say, "I didn't sign it. It just became law." The bottom line is that the fact that the economy does not come out of the Depression, and Cleveland is blamed for it. And there's going to be a lot of protests against it. One guy, Jacob Coxey, is actually going to lead a march on Washington, demanding particularly, legal tender money. He loved legal tender so much he even named his own son Legal Tender. So his son's name is Legal Tender Coxey. Congress doesn't pay attention to him, so if nothing gets really done. All of this sets up the backdrop for the election of 1896. The Democrats are now faced with basically, Grover Cleveland and a bad economy. This is going to be a good year for the Republicans, as long as they nominate a guy that can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? And so the Democrats are going to be blamed. So this is a really good time for the Republicans. The Republican approach was crafted by a man named Mark Hanna, who says, you know what, we have the perfect candidate, a former Army officer wounded at the Battle of Antietam. His name was William McKinley. And McKinley is going to call for protective tariffs and the gold standard. He's appealing to the Northeast. So the Republicans are running a conservative, pro-business, pro-Northeastern platform. The Democrats are going to make a drastic change. They're going to completely reject Grover Cleveland. And in fact, they're going to go into a much more liberal direction. For example, at the nominating convention, they are going to have a debate over whether or not they should have silver or they should have gold for the monetary system. One of the people that's going to be involved in the debate is a man named William Jennings Bryan. He's only 36 when he is at the convention. The Constitution has a minimum age of 35 to be president of the United States. So he is, he's from Nebraska, a solidly Republican state, by the way, and it was ridiculous to think that he would win the Democratic nomination for president of the United States. Well, Bryan is going to be the last person to speak at the Democratic National Convention, in which he's going to actually he's going to advocate for silver, not gold. He's an intensely religious man, and every speech that he makes has a lot of biblical allusions and references, right? He begins talking a little bit about the tariff, and here's what he says. And now, my friends, let me come to the paramount issue. If they ask us why it is that we say more on the money question than we say upon the tariff question, I reply that if protection has slain its thousands, the gold standard has slain its tens of thousands. If they ask us why we do not embody our platform all the things we believe in, we reply that when we have restored the money of the Constitution, all other necessary reforms are possible. But until that is done, there is no other reform that can be accomplished. Any biblical scholars out there? Slain its thousands, slain its tens of thousands. What does it sound like? This is the conflict between Saul and David in the Old Testament. He goes further. You come to us and tell us our great cities are in favor of the gold standard. We reply that the great cities rest upon our broad and fertile prairies. Burn down your cities and leave our farms, and your cities will spring up again as if by magic. But destroy our farms, and grass will grow in the streets of every city in the country. The backbone of America, farmers. If they dare to come out in the open field and defend the gold standard as a good thing, we will fight them to the uttermost. Having behind us the producing masses of this nation and the world, supported by the commercial interests, the laboring interests, and the toilers everywhere, we will answer their demand for a gold standard by saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. Crown of thorns, cross of gold, the crucifixion of Jesus. This brings down the House. All the delegates go to the Nebraska side of the floor and lay down their signs. And basically what you now have is a pro-reform, pro-Southern, pro-Western candidate for the Democrats. But this is, there's going to be a third party we're going to have to note. The populists. The populists are kind of over the barrel here. They know the Republicans aren't going to do anything towards their agenda, and so the only person that's going to actually be able to achieve anything that the populists want is the Democrats, the William Jennings Bryan. But to do so, you're pretty much going to basically wipe out the existence of your party, when it comes to fusing with the Democrats. So the populists fuse themselves with the Democratic candidate. So they nominate William Jennings Bryan as their candidate as well. It's in 1896 that the two parties are now going to go in the directions that we see them today. The Republicans are going to be much more conservative. The Democrats, however, are going to be much more liberal. Nevertheless, it doesn't really matter when it comes to this election, because the fact that the economy is bad, it's a good year for the Republicans. The Republicans are going to win. And William McKinley, in his first, by 1900, is going to sign into law the Gold Standard Act. He is going to preside over the post-panic prosperity, and he's also going to be pretty lucky because of the fact that the gold supplies are actually going to be increased during this time period, right? Basically, what happens is you have gold strikes in the Klondike, in Australia, in South Africa, to the point that gold supplies throughout the world are going to increase by 400%. So McKinley's kind of lucky here, but he can go around the country now and say basically, "See, I told you so." And so this, the significance of the populists and the significance of the election of 1896, in the long run, is that the modern day political leanings of the Republican and Democratic parties start in 1896. Now we can start thinking of the traditional alignment, the traditional orientation of the two parties today.